This story is titled, "My Fiancée Discovered That My Parents Gathered Every Saturday to Mock and Criticize Her Behind Our Backs, so she packed her belongings and left me while secretly planning revenge against my family." Hey everyone, I'm Thomas, 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has maintained this peculiar tradition that I never questioned until recently. Every Thursday evening, without fail, we gather at my parents' house for what we call our family meeting. These aren't casual dinner get-togethers or normal family catch-up sessions. They're something else entirely. The most unusual aspect is that no spouses are allowed. Only my parents, my siblings, and I can attend. This rule existed long before I was born, and growing up, it never seemed odd to me. It was simply the way things were in our family, a tradition I accepted without question, like holiday rituals or birthday celebrations. 2 years ago, I married Jessica, the love of my life. Early in our relationship, I explained this family tradition to her. I told her that these Thursday meetings had been around for decades, an immutable part of my family's routine. To her credit, Jessica accepted this without complaints or pushback. She never asked to come along, and I never thought much about it. In my mind, it was just another family ritual, nothing worth examining too closely. I assumed she didn't care since she never raised any objections. Things started to change after we'd been married for a while. At first, the shifts were subtle, easy to dismiss. Jessica began mentioning how my family's attitude toward her felt inconsistent. One day they'd be warm and welcoming, treating her like she was truly part of the family. The next day, they'd be distant and cold, as if she had done something wrong without realizing it. These mood swings seemed to follow no pattern I could discern. Initially, I brushed off her concerns as paranoia. My family could be a bit formal and reserved at times. That was just their way. I didn't feel like they were treating Jessica any differently than they'd treat anyone else who married into our family. But as time went on, her observations became harder to ignore. Then Jessica started noticing something truly strange. She pointed out that every time I returned from these Thursday meetings, my attitude toward her would shift in small but noticeable ways. Sometimes I'd become more critical of things she did around the house. Other times I'd randomly bring up issues in our marriage that I had never seemed concerned about before. The most troubling part was that I had been completely blind to these changes in my own behavior. Jessica isn't the type to make accusations without evidence. She's thoughtful and observant, qualities that initially attracted me to her. She didn't immediately confront me with her suspicions, instead taking time to gather more information and analyze the patterns she was seeing. The real turning point came when Jessica noticed that my siblings' spouses were experiencing similar treatment. She wasn't the only one feeling this weird shift in dynamics. My brother's wife and my sister's husband also seemed increasingly uneasy around my family, though they never explicitly voiced their concerns. This pattern was too consistent to be coincidental, and Jessica couldn't ignore it anymore. One evening during dinner, Jessica casually brought up the topic of the Thursday meetings. Her approach wasn't aggressive or confrontational. She was simply curious in that thoughtful way of hers. "What do you guys even talk about during these meetings?" she asked, her tone light and conversational. I remember shrugging, not thinking much of the question. "Just family business," I replied vaguely. She gave me a small smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Yeah, but like what kind of business specifically?" I found myself at a loss for words. Despite attending these meetings my entire life, I couldn't articulate what exactly we discussed that was so important. "Nothing important, really. Just checking in on each other, catching up on family matters," I answered lamely. Jessica let the subject drop, but I could tell my response hadn't satisfied her curiosity. There was a slight furrow in her brow that told me she was still processing, still analyzing. In retrospect, her question should have made me pause and reflect on why I couldn't give her a straightforward answer about meetings I'd been attending weekly for my entire life. After that night, I began noticing something strange that had always been there, but I'd never consciously acknowledged. Whenever the topic of Thursday meetings came up around my family, their demeanor would change instantly. My parents would quickly steer the conversation in another direction, their voices becoming just a touch too casual. My siblings would suddenly find themselves busy with their phones or remember urgent tasks they needed to attend to. It was as if an invisible switch had been flipped. It dawned on me that there was an unspoken rule in our family, not just about keeping spouses out of the meetings, but also about never discussing them with outsiders. This realization made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't quite articulate why. Jessica, meanwhile, had started paying even closer attention to these dynamics. She began picking up on little details that had escaped my notice. How, after certain meetings, my parents would suddenly express strong opinions about aspects of our marriage. How my sister's husband seemed irritated and withdrawn after his wife returned from the family gathering. How my brother's wife, who had always been friendly and open with Jessica, was growing increasingly reserved and guarded in her presence. Then came the slip-up that we couldn't ignore. During a family gathering, one of my younger cousins, a teenager who clearly wasn't adept at keeping secrets, made an offhand comment while talking to Jessica about something completely unrelated. "Oh, you don't know? I thought you knew," he said suddenly, his expression suggesting he had revealed something forbidden. Jessica frowned, her interest piqued. "Knew what?" The effect was immediate. My cousin clammed up, his face flushing with the realization that he had said something he shouldn't have. Before Jessica could press further, my mother stepped in with a sharp look at my cousin before smoothly changing the subject, her intervention too quick and practiced to be coincidental. That moment stuck with Jessica like a splinter under the skin. She didn't mention it during the gathering, maintaining her composure with the grace I'd come to admire in her. But later that night, as we prepared for bed, she brought it up, unable to shake the feeling that something significant was being hidden from her. I still didn't take her concern seriously, dismissing it as just a teenager being careless with his words. But Jessica wasn't so easily convinced, and looking back, I should have trusted her instincts. As the weeks passed, Jessica's concerns grew stronger. She told me she was starting to feel like my family was treating her like an outsider, not just in a casual way, but intentionally and systematically. It wasn't just about being excluded from a weekly meeting. It was about being evaluated and found wanting without even knowing the criteria. She began to question why a family tradition would be so rigid about excluding spouses. She pointed out something I'd never considered before. If the meetings were really just harmless check-ins like I claimed, there would be no logical reason to keep them secret. The inconsistency was glaring once she laid it out for me, but I still struggled to see what she found so concerning. I tried to reassure her, telling her that my family just had their own way of doing things, but Jessica wasn't buying my explanations anymore. The inconsistency in my family's behavior, the secrecy surrounding the meetings, and the way my parents reacted whenever the topic came up. It all added up to something she couldn't ignore, and increasingly, neither could I. Then Jessica made a connection that sent a chill through me. She started thinking back to specific moments when my attitude toward her had changed after these Thursday gatherings. Moments when I had suddenly started nitpicking things in our marriage that had never bothered me before. Small criticisms about how she organized the kitchen cabinets, comments about her spending habits that I'd never expressed concern about previously, or subtle remarks about her relationship with her own family. She wondered if the meetings were influencing me in ways I wasn't even conscious of. That's when she decided she needed to know the truth. I didn't realize it at the time, but Jessica was already formulating a plan to uncover what was really happening at those Thursday meetings. And when she finally did discover the truth, it would shatter everything she thought she knew about my family. And unfortunately, her suspicions would prove to be right in the worst possible way. Jessica had always been observant. It was one of her strongest qualities. But I never realized just how much she noticed until that fateful evening. She hadn't planned to eavesdrop. She didn't need to set up any elaborate scheme. The truth revealed itself when my mother and my brother's wife were standing in the kitchen during a family gathering, casually discussing what had been brought up in the last Thursday meeting. They weren't whispering or acting like they were hiding anything, which somehow made the revelation all the more disturbing. As if this way of operating was so normal to them that they didn't even think twice about discussing it openly when they thought no outsiders were listening. The conversation started innocuously enough, something about my father's health concerns and my sister's new job. But then the tone shifted subtly. My mother sighed deeply, mentioning that my sister had been particularly vocal about the Jessica issue during the last meeting. Those words caught Jessica's attention immediately. She wasn't standing right next to them. She was arranging dessert plates on the dining table, but she was close enough to hear the words clearly. The Jessica issue had been addressed again. Apparently, they had gone over various concerns about how she was fitting in with the family. The words were spoken so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took a moment for their full meaning to sink in. They weren't discussing normal family matters. They were sitting in a room every Thursday evening analyzing Jessica, her behavior, her habits, her attitude, her worthiness to be part of our family. They were dissecting her life as if she were a specimen under a microscope rather than a person with feelings and dignity. My mother complained that Jessica wasn't as family-oriented as they had hoped. My brother's wife chimed in, mentioning how she had been forced to change certain things about herself before she was fully accepted by the family. The implication was clear. This wasn't unique to Jessica. Every spouse who married into our family was subjected to this scrutiny, this process of evaluation and correction. Then my mother made a comment that stopped Jessica cold. She just doesn't seem to respect our way of doing things. If he has to correct her a few times before she gets it, so be it. Jessica didn't react immediately. She didn't storm into the kitchen or demand answers. She simply stepped away quietly, went upstairs to our old bedroom in my parents' house, and gathered her things. I was still at work, completely unaware of what had just transpired, unaware that my world was about to be turned upside down. When I got home that night, I was completely unprepared for what awaited me. Jessica was sitting on our living room couch with a packed bag beside her. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes held a mixture of hurt and resolve that made my stomach drop. She wasn't crying or yelling, emotions I might have been better equipped to handle. Instead, she was completely calm, which somehow felt more terrifying. She looked at me directly and asked, "Are the Thursday meetings about evaluating me?" The way she said it, so direct, so certain, made it clear she already knew the answer. She wasn't asking a question. She was giving me an opportunity to tell the truth. I fumbled with my response, trying to downplay what she'd discovered. "It's not like that," I insisted, hearing the weakness in my own voice. "The meetings are about keeping the family strong, making sure everyone is on the same page." I thought I was reassuring her, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Jessica just stared at me like she didn't recognize the person standing in front of her. The man she had married, the man she thought she knew, wouldn't have participated in something so fundamentally disrespectful to her. And yet, here I was, confirming her worst suspicions with my weak justifications. "How long have they been discussing me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the hurt evident in her eyes. I tried to soften the blow. "The meetings have always been about making sure our family works well together. It's not just about you." As soon as the words left my mouth, I realized I'd made things worse. Much worse. "So it's not just me," she said flatly. "You've all been doing this to everyone who marries into the family." She wasn't asking. She was connecting the final dots. She asked if my siblings' spouses had been put through the same scrutiny. I hesitated, and that brief pause was all the confirmation she needed. The truth was written in my silence, in my inability to deny what had been happening for generations in my family. Without another word, Jessica grabbed her bag and told me she needed space. I stood there, bewildered, watching as my wife prepared to walk out the door. I still didn't fully grasp the severity of the situation. In my mind, these meetings were just how things were done, a family tradition that, while perhaps unusual, was ultimately meant to strengthen our bonds, not destroy them. "You're acting like this is some huge betrayal," I said, confusion evident in my voice. "This is just how things are done in my family. My mother always said these meetings were meant to strengthen marriages, not harm them." Jessica wasn't interested in my explanations or justifications. She walked past me, got into her car, and drove off into the night. I stood in the doorway, watching her taillights disappear down our street, feeling like the ground had suddenly given way beneath my feet. I tried calling her immediately, but she didn't pick up. I then tried her best friend, but that call went straight to voicemail as well. I sat in our living room staring at the door, trying to piece together what had just happened. It didn't make sense to me. How could something that was meant to help the family push her away like this? The next morning, I reached out to my parents, seeking guidance or perhaps validation that I wasn't in the wrong. Their reaction only deepened my confusion. My mother sighed as if Jessica's reaction was expected, even predictable. My father shook his head, saying she would come around once she realized the meetings were for her own good. What struck me was how none of my family seemed surprised by Jessica's reaction. My brother's wife didn't say anything, but she wouldn't meet my eyes across the kitchen table. My sister, on the other hand, was openly annoyed. She thought Jessica was being overly dramatic, insisting that if she had nothing to hide, she wouldn't have a problem with the meetings analyzing her every move and decision. I found myself asking a question I should have considered years ago. Why did we never tell Jessica what the meetings were about from the beginning? My mother gave me a strange look, as if I'd asked why we breathe air. "Because not everyone can handle the truth about themselves," she replied matter-of-factly. That was the first moment I felt something was truly off. All my life, I'd been told these meetings were normal, that this was how families stayed strong and united. But now Jessica was gone, and I didn't know if she was coming back. The certainty I had grown up with was starting to crumble. I called Jessica again that night, desperate to fix whatever had broken between us, but there was no answer. The next morning, I texted asking her to talk, to give me a chance to explain. Hours passed with nothing but silence from her end. The waiting was excruciating, each minute stretching out endlessly as I checked my phone obsessively for any response. Finally, a single message appeared. "I need time. Don't call me." I stared at those 7 words, reading them over and over again. Jessica wasn't just upset. She was drawing a line, establishing boundaries I had never anticipated needing in our relationship. For the first time, I began to seriously question whether the Thursday meetings were really about family unity or if they were about something else entirely. And for the first time, I wasn't so sure I was on the right side of this conflict. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't my family, someone who could give me an unbiased perspective on the situation. I reached out to a close friend, someone I'd known for years, a level-headed guy who was happily married himself and knew both Jessica and me well. I needed his take on what was happening. We met at a quiet bar where I could speak freely without worrying about being overheard. I told him everything about the Thursday meetings, how they worked, what was discussed, and how Jessica had found out. I described the family tradition as I understood it, explaining that we evaluated new family members to ensure they were a good fit, to help them adjust to our way of doing things. As I spoke, I watched my friend's expression change from curiosity to disbelief to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. He listened without interrupting, giving me space to lay out the entire situation. When I finished, there was a long, heavy silence between us. He took a slow sip of his beer, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Look, man," he finally said, "I don't know how to tell you this gently, but your family has been treating Jessica like a project, not a person. These meetings aren't about keeping a family together. They're about control." His bluntness caught me off guard. I started to defend my family, but he cut me off with a simple question that stopped me in my tracks. If the meetings were really about family unity, why were they always focused on finding faults in people who married into the family? I pushed back immediately. "It's not like that," I insisted. "My family just wants to make sure everyone fits in, that we all get along." The words sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Fits into what?" he challenged, leaning forward. "A system where your wife is graded like an assignment? Do you even hear yourself?" I fell silent. I had no good answer. The conversation ended shortly after that, with my friend offering a sympathetic pat on the shoulder but no absolution for my role in what had happened. I left feeling more unsettled than when I'd arrived. The next day, my younger brother reached out to me unexpectedly. We'd always been close growing up, but like most siblings, we drifted a bit as adults, keeping in touch but not necessarily confiding in each other about personal matters. His call surprised me. "Can we meet up?" he asked. "Just the two of us. There's something I need to talk to you about." We met at a coffee shop across town, far from our parents' neighborhood. My brother looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being seen. It was behavior I'd never witnessed from him before, and it heightened my already considerable anxiety. Once we were settled with our coffees, he spoke in a low voice, admitting something that made me pause. He had always been uncomfortable with the way our parents ran the Thursday meetings, but he kept his head down to avoid trouble. He described how he had seen the meetings break people down over the years, how spouses who married into the family either eventually changed to fit the mold or left. "I never agreed with it," he confessed, staring into his coffee. "But I also never said anything. I just went along with it." He looked up at me then, his expression sincere. I admire Jessica for pushing back. If anyone was going to challenge this system, it would be her. I asked him if our parents had subjected his wife to the same scrutiny and criticism. He hesitated before nodding reluctantly. "They did," he admitted, "but she learned to adjust." That was the word he used, adjust. And I didn't like the way it sounded. It suggested compromise, but not the healthy kind that relationships are built on. It suggested surrendering pieces of yourself to fit someone else's expectations. It suggested loss. Later that night, my mother called me. Her tone was sharp and impatient, demanding to know if I had talked sense into Jessica yet. When I explained that Jessica was still taking space and hadn't agreed to speak with me, she scoffed audibly. "She's being dramatic," my mother declared. "Every family has its ways, and it's your job to make sure your wife understands and respects that." Then she said something that would stick with me long after the conversation ended. "You're the man in this marriage. You bring her back under control." I don't know why, but that was the moment everything shifted for me. Before, I had been trying to get Jessica to see things from my perspective, to understand the family traditions I had grown up with. But now, for the first time, I was starting to see things from her perspective, to understand how it must have felt to learn that her husband's family gathered weekly to dissect her behavior, to find fault with who she was and how she lived, that they had been doing this for our entire marriage without her knowledge or consent. My father called me a few minutes after my mother hung up. His approach was different, calmer, more measured. He told me to give Jessica time, that she would eventually see reason and understand the meetings were never meant to hurt her. He urged patience, assuring me that she would come around once the initial shock wore off. "Trust me," he said, his voice carrying that familiar paternal certainty I had relied on all my life. "She'll understand once she calms down." But for the first time, I wasn't sure if Jessica would come around. More importantly, I wasn't sure if she should. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of clarity beginning to form, like a photograph slowly developing into focus. Then something happened that I didn't expect. One of my sisters-in-law, my older brother's wife, who had always been quiet and compliant around my parents, reached out to Jessica directly. She sent her a long, heartfelt message, apologizing for not standing up against the Thursday meetings and the toxic family dynamic they represented. In her message, she confessed to Jessica that she had been through the exact same thing when she first married into the family. She admitted that, over time, she had let herself believe it was normal, that this was just how families operated. But seeing Jessica's reaction had forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. It wasn't normal. It had never been normal. She told Jessica she admired her for refusing to accept what so many others had simply endured in silence. Jessica forwarded the message to me without adding any commentary of her own. She didn't need to. The message spoke volumes. I read it once, twice, then a third time, each reading more devastating than the last. The truth was inescapable. My family had done this before, systematically, repeatedly, to every person who married into our ranks, and no one, not a single person, had ever put a stop to it, until now. When Jessica and I finally met in person after nearly a week of separation, she chose a neutral location, a quiet corner table in a cafe across town. She looked tired but resolute. There were no tears, no raised voices, just a clear-eyed certainty that made my chest tighten with anxiety. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I'm not staying in a marriage where I'm examined and judged like a test subject," she told me, her voice steady. "If you want this marriage to work, the meetings have to end. No negotiations, no compromise on this point." I tried to explain to make her understand what she was asking of me. "Stopping the meetings would mean going against everything my family stands for," I said, hearing the weakness in my own argument even as I made it. Jessica didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to go against your family," she replied calmly. "I'm asking you to put our marriage first." That was when I realized she wasn't going to budge. She wasn't looking for an apology or asking me to make gradual changes. This was an ultimatum, all or nothing. I had to choose, and whatever choice I made would change everything forever. When I told my parents I wouldn't be attending the next Thursday meeting, my mother's reaction was immediate and volcanic. She was furious, her voice shaking with a rage I rarely witnessed. She informed me that if I refused to come, I would be turning my back on my family, that I would be the first person in generations to break this sacred tradition. "Your absence will be seen as a betrayal," she warned, her voice cold, "to all of us." I told her I needed to think about it, but in reality, I already knew what I had to do. I was out of time. Jessica had given me a choice. My family had given me a choice. And no matter what I decided, I was about to lose someone I loved. The message from my mother came early the next morning. "We need to talk. Be here by noon." Jessica didn't want me to go. She knew exactly how this confrontation would play out. They would twist everything, make it about her corrupting influence, and pressure me into submission. She wasn't wrong about their tactics, but I needed to face them, if only to end this toxic cycle once and for all. And when I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere was suffocating with tension. My father was seated at the head of the dining table, an unreadable expression on his face. My mother stood nearby with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, radiating cold fury. My siblings were already there, my younger brother looking uncomfortable and out of place, my older sister sitting stiffly with judgment written across her features, and my other brother quietly watching the proceedings without comment. Most surprising was the presence of my sister-in-law, the one who had messaged Jessica. She sat with her hands clasped together on the table, studiously avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her clasped hands. She was afraid, but she was there. The meeting began the moment I sat down, no pretense of pleasantries or small talk. My mother's voice was sharp as she launched into her prepared speech. Jessica was tearing the family apart, she declared. She accused my wife of planting doubts in my head, making me believe there was something sinister about our cherished family traditions. She called Jessica's reaction childish and manipulative, claiming that every spouse before her had accepted these meetings without such theatrical resistance. As she spoke, I glanced around the table, noting the varied reactions of my family members. My younger brother looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact. My older sister nodded along with everything my mother said, her face a mask of righteous agreement. My other brother maintained his neutral expression, revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, my younger brother found his courage. He spoke up, his voice quiet but determined, admitting that he had never liked the Thursday meetings. He confessed that he had always felt uneasy about them but had kept quiet to avoid conflict. My mother cut him off mid-sentence, dismissing him as too soft to understand the importance of maintaining proper family structure and hierarchy. Her dismissal was casual, practiced, the response of someone accustomed to squashing dissent without a second thought. Then my father turned to me, his voice calmer but no less firm. If I refused to bring Jessica back in line, he explained, I would be cut off from family decisions. He reminded me that our family had always been united, a singular entity moving in lockstep, and that I was disrupting that unity with my defiance. He didn't say it outright, but the implication was clear as glass. If I refused to comply, I'd be treated as an outsider, no longer truly part of the family that had defined my identity for 29 years. The pressure increased as my mother brought up financial support, listing the things they had done for me over the years: the college tuition, the down payment assistance for our house, the countless ways they had supported me. "Are you willing to throw all of that away over a woman who doesn't respect tradition?" she asked, her voice dripping with scorn. My older sister added that the meetings were necessary to keep the family strong, that without them chaos would take over. She spoke of Jessica as a disruptive force, someone who didn't understand the value of what we had built over generations. Then, for the first time in years, someone besides Jessica openly challenged my parents. My sister-in-law, the one who had messaged Jessica, finally lifted her head. Her voice wavered with nervousness, but she spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. She admitted that she had hated the Thursday meetings from the beginning. She confessed that she had been pressured into silence and compliance, that she had spent years changing fundamental aspects of herself to fit expectations that were impossible to meet. "I've pretended to be someone else for so long that sometimes I forget who I really am," she said, her words hanging in the suddenly silent room. My mother snapped at her immediately, her reaction visceral and cutting. "You were handled long ago," she hissed, not even bothering to soften the naked hostility in her voice. "You learned how to be part of this family, unlike Jessica." That was the breaking point for me. Something inside me, some last vestige of blind loyalty perhaps, finally shattered. I looked around the dining room table at the people I had trusted and loved all my life, and for the first time, I truly saw them. I saw the control mechanisms, the manipulation, the subtle and not so subtle ways they kept everyone in line. This wasn't about unity. It had never been about unity. It was about control, absolute and unquestioned. My mother turned to me one last time, her final demand laid bare. Jessica must apologize, accept the meetings, and acknowledge that she had overreacted. If she refused these conditions, she would never be welcome in the family again. The ultimatum was delivered with such casual cruelty that it took my breath away. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor in the tense silence. "I'm not forcing Jessica to apologize for seeing through something that should have never existed in the first place," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm done with the meetings. I'm done with this system." Silence filled the room for a long, suspended moment. No one moved. No one spoke. Then my mother's voice cut through the stillness, cold and final. If you walk out that door, you are no longer our son. I waited for my father to say something, to step in, to stop this from escalating beyond the point of no return. He stayed quiet, his silence a betrayal all its own. Without another word, I turned and left. No one tried to stop me. When I got home, Jessica was waiting. I didn't have to say anything. She could read everything in my expression. She exhaled a long breath, nodded once, and told me this wasn't over, that my family wouldn't let this go easily. She was right, of course. Jessica had always been right. That night, my mother sent a single text message that still sometimes haunts my dreams. "You are dead to us." The silence from my family was immediate and complete. No calls, no messages, nothing. When I checked my phone later, I discovered I had been removed from all family group chats, family email threads, and social media groups. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world. I wasn't surprised by the swift excommunication, but seeing it happen in real time still hit me differently than I had expected. There was pain, yes, but also a strange sense of relief. A cousin reached out to me privately, the only one who dared to acknowledge what was happening. He told me my name had been wiped from everything: family event planning, shared calendars, even casual chats about everyday life. My mother had made it crystal clear. I was no longer part of the family. I had been erased. My younger brother sent a single message, short and hesitant. He told me he supported my decision but couldn't say it openly. He wasn't ready to risk what I had, to lose his place in the family hierarchy. I understood his position completely. I didn't respond, knowing that any message I sent might somehow make its way back to my parents and put him in danger of the same fate that had befallen me. Jessica watched everything unfold with a mixture of sadness and vindication. She didn't say much, but I could see the weight of it all reflected in her eyes when she looked at me. She had never wanted to come between me and my family. She had just wanted to be treated with basic respect and dignity. Now I had lost everything I had grown up with: the support system, the sense of belonging, the familial identity that had shaped me for nearly 3 decades. She was grateful I had stood by her, but I could tell she was afraid of what this exile would do to me in the long run. My closest friends reassured me that I had made the right choice. They reminded me that love and respect should never come with conditions, that true family supports you without demanding you sacrifice your integrity or happiness. Their words were comforting, but doubt still crept in during the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts. Had I been too harsh? Had I acted impulsively? Was there some middle ground I had failed to find? Some way to fix things without sacrificing my marriage? Then my mother sent an email. It was long and carefully worded, full of phrases that seemed reasonable on the surface but carried manipulative undertones that I had finally learned to recognize. The message was clear. She would welcome me back if I corrected my mistake, if I left Jessica. That was the only acceptable solution in her mind, the only way to restore balance in the family. She painted it as if my marriage was the problem, not their obsession with control and conformity. Jessica read it over my shoulder, scrolling through every line, taking in each manipulative word. When she reached the end, she looked at me with hard clarity in her eyes and said without hesitation, "If you even consider this, we're done." I assured her she had nothing to worry about. The choice, difficult as it had been to make initially, was now crystal clear to me. I would not sacrifice my marriage for the conditional acceptance my family offered. The next day, my older sister reached out. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought she might be different, that she might understand or at least try to see my perspective. I was wrong. She spoke to me as if she were delivering a verdict from on high, explaining that I had been swept up in Jessica's manipulation. She insisted that our parents only wanted what was best for me, and that I had thrown away a lifetime of family support over one person who clearly didn't understand our values. There was no empathy in her words, no attempt to understand my position. She didn't ask how I was doing or if I was okay. She just wanted me to come back in line, to conform once again to the family's expectations. Then the story started spreading through our extended family like wildfire. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in months or even years began reaching out with vaguely concerned messages. Some asked if I was okay, their words carefully neutral while they tried to determine which side I was on. Others made it clear they had already chosen their allegiance, their messages echoing my mother's perspective with eerie similarity. It quickly became apparent that my parents had been busy, systematically contacting every branch of the family tree to ensure their version of events was the first and only one anyone heard. In their carefully crafted narrative, Jessica was the villain of the story, a manipulative outsider who had brainwashed me, isolated me, and turned me against my own blood. The story they told bore little resemblance to reality, but it was the only one most of my relatives would ever hear. Then, unexpectedly, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years reached out. Unlike the others, his message wasn't a thinly veiled attempt to bring me back into the fold. Instead, he told me something that made me feel a little less alone. He had always found the Thursday meetings unsettling, almost cult-like in their secrecy and purpose. He admired me for getting out, for having the courage to stand against a system everyone else simply accepted. His message was the first time since this all began that I felt something other than loss and doubt. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one who saw the truth about my family. Maybe others had harbored similar concerns but lacked the catalyst, or the courage, to act on them. A few days later, Jessica's family invited us to dinner. I had always gotten along well with her parents and siblings, but this gathering felt different. They welcomed me into their home with the same warmth and genuine affection they always had. No tension, no hidden tests, no unspoken judgments. As we sat around their dinner table, laughing and sharing stories, I realized something profound. For the first time in weeks, possibly for the first time in my entire life, I felt like I wasn't being measured, wasn't being evaluated against some invisible standard. I was simply home. The contrast between this acceptance and my own family's conditional love was stark and illuminating. It forced me to confront just how abnormal my upbringing had been, how deeply the Thursday meetings had warped my understanding of what family should be. A final email from my mother arrived a few days later. Unlike her previous lengthy message, this one was short, cold, and direct. "You have been removed from my will." I stared at those 7 words for a long time, waiting for the familiar sting of guilt to rise in my chest, for the pang of regret to overwhelm me. But it never came. Instead, for the first time in my life, I felt something else entirely: relief. The last leverage my mother thought she held over me meant nothing compared to the freedom I had found. The financial threat that once might have brought me to heel now seemed like a small price to pay for my independence. Weeks passed without a word from my family. No calls, no messages, nothing but silence. Part of me thought that perhaps they had finally accepted my decision, that they had moved on and would leave Jessica and me in peace. It almost felt like we might be able to build a new life without their toxic influence hanging over us. I was wrong. Out of nowhere, Jessica started noticing strange activity online. Anonymous accounts began leaving vague, passive-aggressive comments on her social media posts. Things about how a real wife wouldn't pull a man away from his family, how certain women were manipulative by nature. At first, the comments seemed random, possibly just internet trolls, but then the messages escalated. Direct messages started coming in, calling Jessica manipulative and controlling, even accusing her of brainwashing me. The language used sounded familiar, too familiar. It mirrored exactly how my mother and sister had spoken about her during our final confrontation. I checked my own social media accounts and found similar messages trickling in. Some were subtle digs. Others were outright attacks on my character and judgment. It didn't take long to realize where these messages were coming from. My family wasn't staying silent after all. They had just changed tactics, moving from direct confrontation to a more insidious form of pressure. Then my older sister reached out again, but her approach was different this time. Instead of the harsh judgment of her previous message, she sounded almost apologetic. She admitted that my mother had been systematically calling extended family members, instructing them to cut me off completely. She wasn't just telling relatives that I had abandoned the family. She was making it explicitly clear that anyone who sided with me or even maintained contact would be seen as a traitor themselves. My mother was ensuring that I had no one left, that my support system would be as decimated as possible. Just as I was processing this information, another unexpected message arrived, this time from my father. It was uncharacteristically short for him. He wanted to meet for dinner, just him and me, to talk like men. He suggested a restaurant, a time, and signed off without the lengthy justifications or explanations that typically characterized his communications. Jessica didn't trust this sudden olive branch. "This isn't a peace offering," she warned me, her intuition on high alert. "It's a setup." I knew she was probably right. My father had never once in my life disagreed with my mother on any significant family matter. It was highly unlikely he was reaching out independently now. And yet, some small, hopeful part of me wondered if maybe, just maybe, my father wanted to talk without my mother's influence. I had to see for myself. When I arrived at the restaurant, my stomach immediately sank. My father was there, as promised, but he wasn't alone. My mother sat beside him, her face a mask of stern disapproval. My older sister was there too, along with a man I recognized as our family's priest, a man who had known me since childhood and who held considerable influence in my parents' lives. I had walked straight into an intervention. My mother wasted no time once I sat down at the table. She informed me that I had one last chance to fix things, to undo my mistakes before it was too late. Her words were delivered with the absolute certainty of someone who had never contemplated the possibility of being wrong. The priest spoke next, his familiar voice layered with the authority he'd wielded throughout my childhood. He talked about family unity, about duty, about honoring the people who had raised me. These were concepts that had once held immense power over me, principles that had guided my decisions for nearly 3 decades. But now, hearing them spoken in this context, they rang hollow. Then my mother laid out her terms with brutal clarity. "Divorce Jessica and we will welcome you back. If not, you are exiled for good." I barely had time to process the shock of her demand before my father leaned in, adding another layer to the pressure campaign. He reminded me with careful precision that family ties had built my career, that my professional success was interwoven with their connections and influence. Without their network, he warned, I would find myself struggling in ways I hadn't yet considered. He didn't explicitly threaten to sabotage my career, but the warning was unmistakable. Stay with Jessica and I would lose more than just family. I would lose opportunity, connections, the professional foundation I had built my life upon. The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that it felt more chilling than if he had shouted. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, letting them talk themselves out, letting them deploy every tactic in their arsenal: guilt, nostalgia, fear, obligation. I watched them cycle through emotions and approaches, working in tandem like they had rehearsed this intervention beforehand, which I realized with a strange detachment they probably had. Finally, my sister spoke up, her voice almost pleading despite the harsh content of her words. "This is your last chance to fix this," she said, leaning across the table toward me. "We won't offer again." That was the moment when everything crystallized for me with perfect clarity. They weren't giving me a choice. They never had. They were simply telling me what I needed to do to remain in their world. And if I didn't comply exactly as instructed, I was out. There was no room for compromise, no space for my feelings or desires. It was their way or nothing. I stood up slowly, the decision made with a certainty that surprised even me. "You've already made your choice," I told them, my voice steady. "If you want to lose me over this, that's on you." I walked out of the restaurant, ignoring my mother's last attempt to call me back, her voice rising with anger and disbelief that I would actually leave rather than submit. As soon as I got to my car, I blocked their numbers permanently. This chapter of my life was over. When I arrived home and told Jessica what had happened, she broke down in tears, not in sadness, but in profound relief. She had been terrified that they would manage to pull me back in, that their lifelong conditioning would override the clarity I had recently gained. When she saw that I had stood my ground, the weight she had been carrying for months finally lifted, and she cried in a way I had never seen before. But our ordeal wasn't over. The next morning brought evidence that my family wasn't done with us yet. I received an email from my job's HR department requesting a meeting regarding an anonymous tip they had received. Someone had reported me for a workplace issue that never happened, a completely fabricated accusation designed to trigger an internal review and potentially damage my professional standing. I had no concrete proof of who was behind this false complaint, but I didn't need any. I knew exactly where it had come from. My family had lost control over me directly, so now they were attempting to destroy the life I had chosen, to punish me for my defiance by attacking my livelihood. Jessica and I weren't just dealing with a family fallout anymore. We were under siege, targets of a coordinated campaign to break us down and force compliance. It was time to prepare for whatever came next, to protect ourselves from people who had proved they would stop at nothing to regain control. The workplace attack ultimately failed. After a week of meetings with HR, interviews with colleagues, and reviewing of records, the false complaint against me was dismissed for lack of evidence. My boss pulled me aside afterward, not to reprimand me but to warn me. He told me it was obvious the complaint was a calculated attempt to sabotage my career, and that I should be careful about who I trusted. "I've seen family disputes spill over into the workplace before," he said, his expression grave. This had that feel to it. He didn't outright say he suspected my family, but his meaning was clear enough. I already knew they were behind it, but having someone else recognize the pattern validated my suspicions and strengthened my resolve. A tech-savvy friend offered to help me trace the anonymous emails Jessica and I had been receiving. He ran some checks, cross-referencing the writing patterns with old messages I had saved from my mother. The phrasing, sentence structure, even the distinctive punctuation style, it all pointed directly to her as the author of the harassment. Seeing the evidence laid out so clearly was both vindicating and deeply saddening. There was no longer any room for doubt or wishful thinking about my mother's involvement. Meanwhile, Jessica was growing more paranoid with each passing day. She isn't naturally suspicious or anxious. She's typically level-headed and practical. But she started double-checking the locks before bed, flinching whenever an unknown number called, looking over her shoulder in public places. At first, I thought she was simply overwhelmed by everything that had happened, but then the online attacks against her escalated dramatically. Her business, a small but successful boutique she had built from scratch, her pride and joy, was suddenly hit with a flood of negative reviews across multiple platforms. Each review had a common theme, accusing her of being controlling, manipulative, and emotionally unstable. These weren't coming from real customers. They were targeted attacks meant to discredit her professionally and personally. The campaign was coordinated and relentless, a systematic attempt to destroy something she had worked years to build. We met with a lawyer who specialized in family law and harassment cases. He advised us to document everything: screenshots, emails, messages, the workplace complaint, timestamp records, anything that could prove a pattern of harassment. He explained that while it was difficult to take legal action against family members without clear-cut evidence of specific threats, having documentation would be essential if things escalated further, and we needed legal protection. Family disputes can get ugly, he told us with the weariness of someone who had seen it all. But what you're describing goes beyond a typical estrangement. This is sustained harassment, and you need to protect yourselves. Then my younger brother reached out, asking to meet in person instead of communicating by text. When we met at a coffee shop far from my parents' neighborhood, he looked nervous, constantly glancing around as if expecting to be spotted by a family spy. He told me something that confirmed my worst suspicions. My mother had been going to extended family members one by one, spinning an entirely new and disturbing narrative about my situation. "She's telling everyone that Jessica is abusive towards you," he said, his voice low despite the crowded cafe. "She's painting this picture where Jessica is manipulating you into isolating yourself from the family. Mom's positioning herself as the heartbroken mother trying to save her son from a toxic marriage." The audacity of this lie was staggering. My mother had inverted reality completely, casting herself as the victim and Jessica as the villain, when the truth was exactly the opposite. The calculation behind this move was what disturbed me most. She knew that domestic abuse allegations would generate instant sympathy and support for her position, regardless of their veracity. I didn't even have time to process this revelation before my older sister called. Unlike my younger brother, she wasn't reaching out to warn or support me. She was applying more pressure, insisting that our mother wasn't behind the harassment campaign. She claimed I was making baseless assumptions, that I needed to come to my senses before it was too late. She refused to believe our mother was capable of such malicious behavior, no matter how much evidence I presented. Her denial was so complete that it was almost as if we were living in different realities. Then came the financial retaliation I had been bracing for. My parents controlled a joint family investment fund, something that had been established generations ago and was meant to be shared among siblings as a form of security and inheritance. Without warning or explanation, my access to this fund was revoked. My father sent a terse email claiming I had forfeited my share when I walked away from the family. I wasn't surprised by this move. I had expected some form of financial punishment, but seeing how calculated and systematic they were willing to be made it crystal clear that this was no longer just emotional manipulation. They were methodically attempting to cut me off in every possible way, to isolate me completely, to make the cost of my independence so high that I would have no choice but to surrender. That night, my mother sent one last email. Unlike her previous communications, this one dripped with false sweetness, promising full reconciliation with no more hostility and no more fighting. All I had to do was leave Jessica. It was the same ultimatum they had been pushing from the start, but now it came packaged in a sickly sweet tone, as if she were offering me salvation rather than demanding submission. Jessica read the email over my shoulder, and I felt her hands begin to tremble against my back. It wasn't anger that made her shake, but pure exhaustion. The constant attacks, the never-ending pressure, the knowledge that there were people actively working to destroy our life together. It was taking a toll on her that broke my heart to witness. "I can't keep living like this," she told me, her voice strained. "I'm always waiting for the next attack, always looking over my shoulder. We either need to take serious legal action or consider moving far away, somewhere they can't reach us." I told her we would take action. Running wasn't the answer. The next morning, we went to the police station and filed a formal report documenting the pattern of harassment we'd been experiencing. We brought printouts of the anonymous messages, screenshots of the fake reviews targeting Jessica's business, and documentation of the false workplace complaint. The officers took our report seriously, but they warned us that without direct evidence linking these actions specifically to my parents or sister, there wasn't much they could legally do yet. "But having this report on file is important," one officer explained. "If things escalate further, we have a record of the pattern, which strengthens your case." Then something unexpected happened. My aunt, my mother's sister, reached out to me. She was someone I had barely spoken to over the years. She lived across the country and had always kept her distance from the more intense family dynamics. Her message shocked me. She told me she had always hated the Thursday meetings, that she thought they were controlling and cruel. She had never spoken up about it because my mother was too powerful within the family structure, and challenging her would have meant facing the same ostracism I was now experiencing. But she wanted me to know she supported my decision, even if she could only do so from a distance. Her message was quickly followed by a call from my grandmother, who was in tears, begging me to fix things with my parents. It was immediately apparent that my mother had told her a twisted version of events, making it seem like I had abandoned the family out of selfishness rather than self-preservation. My grandmother, manipulated into believing she was losing her grandson through some petty dispute, pleaded with me to apologize and make things right. I tried to explain the reality of the situation, but she was too distraught to truly hear me. The call ended with her still convinced that I was the one who needed to make amends. That night, Jessica walked into our house holding something small and black in her hand, her face pale with shock. It was a GPS tracker, small, discreet, and modern, that she had found attached underneath her car while changing a flat tire. Someone had physically planted a device to monitor her movements, to track her whereabouts without her knowledge or consent. The harassment had moved beyond the digital realm into something far more invasive and frightening. We went back to the police immediately. This wasn't just online harassment anymore. This was stalking. The officers took this new development very seriously, but they explained that without direct proof of who had placed the tracker on her vehicle, they couldn't take immediate action against any specific individual. They advised us to be extremely cautious, to check our vehicles regularly for similar devices, and to consider installing security cameras around our home. "This isn't over," the detective warned us grimly. "If anything, it's escalating. Be careful." The discovery of the GPS tracker changed everything for us. Up until then, the harassment had felt manipulative and cruel, but still somewhat distant. Words on screens, fabricated complaints, reputation damage. This was different. This was someone physically tracking Jessica's movements, watching her without her knowledge, potentially following her to work, to the grocery store, to her friends' homes. The violation was intimate and terrifying. Jessica's parents wasted no time stepping in once they learned about the tracker. Her father hired a private investigator, determined to uncover who was behind the escalating campaign against us. Jessica's mother insisted we take additional precautions, and within days we had security cameras installed around our home. We thoroughly checked both our cars, meticulously searching for anything else that didn't belong, any other means of surveillance we might have missed. Then my workplace received another anonymous complaint about me. Like the first one, it was baseless and easily disproven. Once again, HR dismissed it after a brief investigation. But this time my boss wasn't just concerned, he was visibly frustrated. He warned me that while these individual claims weren't sticking, the pattern of repeated interference could eventually start causing real damage to my professional reputation. "I know these aren't true," he told me, "but mud sticks if you throw enough of it. You need to find a way to make this stop." I had had enough. After months of escalating harassment, I finally decided to confront my parents directly. I called them, determined to put an end to this destructive campaign one way or another. My father barely engaged with me during the call. He spoke in vague platitudes, treating my concerns as if I was overreacting to normal family disagreements. His dismissive tone only fueled my frustration. There was something particularly infuriating about his calm denial, his refusal to acknowledge the reality of what was happening. My mother, on the other hand, was quick to shift the blame. She played the victim masterfully, acting as if I was attacking them by merely suggesting they had any involvement in what was happening. She insisted, with breathtaking audacity, that I was the one tearing the family apart, that I was the one causing all this pain. Her performance was so convincing that for a brief, disorienting moment, I almost questioned my own perception of events. Not long after these fruitless calls, my older sister sent me a message filled with such vitriol that it left me stunned. She accused me of humiliating our parents, of being selfish beyond measure, of choosing an outsider over the people who had always been there for me. The anger in her words was palpable, as if my decision to stand by my wife was a personal betrayal against her specifically. I didn't respond to her message. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. No argument that would penetrate the fortress of denial and self-righteousness my family had constructed around themselves. Then the private investigator Jessica's father had hired came back with his first substantial findings. The anonymous social media accounts that had been harassing Jessica online were traced back to a device registered at my sister's house. The digital footprint was unmistakable. The accounts had been created and operated from her home network. That night, I made the drive to my sister's house. I didn't go there looking for a fight or a dramatic confrontation. I just wanted answers, confirmation of what we already knew. Her husband answered the door, visibly uncomfortable to find me on their doorstep. My sister was conspicuously absent, having just stepped out, according to him, though her car was clearly visible in the driveway. I didn't mince words. I told him what the investigator had found and asked him directly about his wife's involvement in the harassment campaign against Jessica. He didn't deny it for long. Perhaps he was tired of the deception, or maybe he simply recognized that the evidence was too clear to dispute. After a few minutes of weak deflection, he admitted that my sister had indeed orchestrated most of the online harassment. She had created multiple fake accounts, left dozens of negative reviews on Jessica's business pages, and encouraged other family members to do the same. He claimed, with what seemed like genuine remorse, that he had tried to persuade her to stop, but she had become obsessed with fixing things, with making me see how wrong I was. His description of her behavior was disturbing, less like a concerned sister and more like someone engaged in a personal vendetta. With this confession, I wasted no time taking action. The next morning, my lawyer sent my sister a formal cease and desist letter, making it unequivocally clear that any further harassment would result in legal action. We included screenshots of the fake accounts, IP address information linking them to her home, and copies of the malicious reviews we knew she had posted. The message was unmistakable. We had proof, and we were prepared to use it. Meanwhile, Jessica's business was still suffering from the fallout. Despite our best efforts to report and remove the fake negative reviews, the damage to her reputation had already been done. Sales had dropped significantly, and several longtime customers had been scared away by the fabricated stories of unprofessional behavior and poor service. Watching her struggle to save the business she had poured her heart into only strengthened my resolve to put an end to my family's campaign. The financial retaliation from my parents also continued unabated. They not only refused to release my portion of the family inheritance, but were now claiming legal ownership of several items of significant value that they had previously gifted to me, including a car and various family heirlooms. I didn't even bother arguing the point or engaging with their lawyers. I had stopped expecting fairness from them a long time ago, and material possessions seemed utterly trivial compared to the peace and dignity we were fighting for. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. My younger brother, who had been cautiously supportive but mostly silent throughout the ordeal, publicly cut ties with our parents. In a family group chat that I was no longer part of, but heard about through another relative, he announced that he could no longer stand by while they destroyed a family in the name of protecting it. My aunt followed suit shortly after, declaring that she was done pretending to be okay with the family's toxic control mechanisms. My brother reached out to me privately after his declaration, apologizing for not speaking up sooner. "I should have stood with you from the beginning," he wrote. "I was too afraid of ending up where you are now, but seeing how far they're willing to go, I can't be part of this anymore." My aunt shared similar sentiments, telling me she had spent years pretending to be okay with the family's controlling dynamics because it was easier than fighting against them. But she wasn't going to enable their behavior anymore, even if it meant facing the same exile I had endured. Then came the breakthrough we had been waiting for. The private investigator finally found the conclusive evidence we needed. The GPS tracker that had been planted on Jessica's car had been purchased using an account linked directly to my father's credit card. The paper trail was clear and undeniable: a digital receipt, shipping information, and the matching serial number of the device itself. With this evidence in hand, we filed for a restraining order against my parents and my sister. The police took our report seriously this time. There was no more doubt, no more speculation, just irrefutable proof that my own family had engaged in stalking and harassment. The night before the restraining order was officially processed, my mother sent one last message that revealed the true depth of her inability to accept reality. "You are dead to us. You will regret this for the rest of your life." I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked her number permanently. There was nothing left to say, no bridge left to rebuild. For the first time in my life, I was truly free of their influence, their manipulation, their toxic conception of family. The court granted our request for a restraining order. My parents and older sister were officially forbidden from contacting me or Jessica in any way. It was temporary at first, pending a full hearing, but it was a significant step in the right direction. The legal protection meant that if they tried anything else, there would be immediate and serious consequences. With the restraining order in place, the police took their investigation to the next level. Armed with the evidence from the private investigator, they began looking more deeply into my father's involvement in planting the GPS tracker on Jessica's car. This wasn't being brushed off as a family dispute anymore. It was being treated as the criminal act it was. The detective assigned to our case told us they were building a solid case, methodically gathering evidence that would stand up in court. My older sister did not take the restraining order well. In fact, she seemed to view it as just another battlefield in the ongoing war. She took to social media with a vengeance, making wild accusations about me and Jessica without directly naming us, a thin attempt to circumvent the legal restrictions. She portrayed herself as the victim, calling me ungrateful and claiming Jessica had manipulated me into destroying our family. She even went so far as to hint that I had become abusive toward my own parents, a vicious lie that cut deeper than I expected. Some extended family members, the ones who had been most thoroughly conditioned to follow my mother's lead without question, supported my sister's narrative publicly, adding their own embellishments to the story. Others saw through the deception, reaching out to me privately to offer support or simply to ask for my side of the story. The family was fracturing along lines that had probably existed for generations but had never been so clearly exposed. Then my grandmother called again. Her voice was thick with emotion, a mixture of confusion and grief that made my chest ache despite everything that had happened. She had been completely manipulated by my mother's version of events, fed a steady diet of lies designed to paint me as the villain and my parents as the wounded victims. She didn't understand why I was doing this, why I was shutting my family out. She begged me to fix things, to be the bigger person, to repair the damage before it was too late. I listened to her pleas without interrupting. I owed her that much, at least. But there was nothing I could say that would bridge the chasm between the reality I was living and the fiction my mother had created for her. My grandmother didn't know the full truth, only what my mother had carefully curated for her consumption. I thanked her for caring, for reaching out, but I couldn't offer the reconciliation she so desperately wanted. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. A week later, I received a thick envelope containing official legal documents. My parents had gone through with their final act of severance. They had formally disinherited me. They made sure I had concrete proof of this decision, sending copies of the legal paperwork directly to my lawyer rather than to me personally. It was meant to be a final slap in the face, a last act of revenge that would wound me deeply. But by then, it meant nothing. The inheritance, the family name, the approval I had once so desperately craved, all of it had lost its power over me. I had already let them go in all the ways that mattered. The legal documents merely formalized what had already happened emotionally and psychologically. Jessica struggled with guilt throughout this whole ordeal. Despite my constant reassurances that my family's toxicity had existed long before she came into my life, she blamed herself for the complete collapse of my relationship with them. I could see the weight she carried in the way she hesitated before talking about our future, in the way she flinched when an unknown number called her phone, in the shadows that occasionally crossed her face when she thought I wasn't looking. "If you had married someone else," she said one night as we lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, "someone more compliant, someone willing to be molded by your family, you wouldn't have lost them." "If I had married someone like that," I replied, taking her hand, "I would have lost myself instead, and that would have been the greater tragedy." Meanwhile, the division within my extended family grew stronger and more defined. More relatives began reaching out to me privately, telling me they had always felt something was wrong with the dynamics in our family, but had never had the courage to break away from the established patterns. Others took my parents' side without question, cutting me off completely just as they had been instructed to do. It didn't matter anymore. I was done fighting for the approval of people who could only love conditionally. Then the police reached their decision regarding the GPS tracker. There was enough evidence to press minor charges against my father for illegally tracking Jessica's movements. While it wouldn't result in jail time given his age and lack of prior offenses, it was enough to create a legal record of what had happened, enough to send a message that he couldn't act with impunity, that there were consequences even for him. When the charges were filed, something unexpected happened. My parents disappeared from the social scene they had dominated for decades. There was no announcement, no warning. They simply packed up and moved to another city almost overnight. The relatives who still spoke to them claimed they wanted a fresh start, a chance to rebuild away from the negativity I had created. The reality, of course, was far different. They weren't seeking a fresh start. They were fleeing the mess they had created, running from the social consequences of their actions. For the first time in their lives, they weren't in control of the narrative, couldn't manipulate perception to their advantage. So they left, hoping distance would restore the illusion of their perfect family life. A week after they moved, my mother broke the restraining order to send one final message: "Never contact us again." I replied with a single word, "Gladly," and then blocked her new number for good. It was the last communication we would ever have, the final period at the end of a chapter in my life that had gone on far too long. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt truly free. The constant anxiety, the dread of what they might do next, the shadow they had cast over my life, it was all lifting, dissolving like morning fog under the warmth of the sun. I could breathe again, could look to the future without constantly glancing over my shoulder at the past. Jessica's business gradually started recovering. Her loyal customers returned one by one, and new ones came in, either unaware of the fabricated controversy or deliberately supporting her despite it. The fake reviews eventually faded into the background of her online presence, outnumbered by genuine positive experiences from actual customers. Her shop bounced back stronger than before, resilient just like its owner. My younger brother, now completely estranged from our parents, began therapy for the first time in his life. He told me he felt a profound sense of relief, like he could finally breathe without our parents hovering over him, controlling his every move and decision. Without their oppressive influence, he had a chance to discover who he actually was, to build his own life according to his own values rather than those imposed on him. Jessica and I made one last important decision together. We were completely done with the past and everything it represented. It was time to move forward into a future of our own making, one defined by our choices rather than my family's toxic influence. We decided to make a clean break, not just emotionally, but physically as well. We put our house on the market, the home we had lovingly furnished together over the first 2 years of our marriage. The place held too many memories now, too many shadows of confrontations and revelations. Every corner seemed to echo with painful conversations, every room tainted by the knowledge that my mother had likely sat in her Thursday meetings discussing how we had arranged the furniture or selected the paint colors. The house sold quickly, faster than we expected. Perhaps the universe was telling us it was indeed time to move on. We packed our belongings, keeping only what truly mattered to us, what represented our life together rather than our past lives separately. It was cathartic, this shedding of possessions, this deliberate choosing of what to carry forward and what to leave behind. We moved to a new city several states away, far enough that chance encounters with my family would be virtually impossible. We found a neighborhood that felt right, diverse, vibrant, filled with young families and creative energy. Our new home was smaller than our previous one, but somehow felt more spacious, unburdened by the weight of toxic history. For the first time since I could remember, I felt completely free from the constant pressure to conform to someone else's expectations. There was no more looking over our shoulders, no more dreading the ping of an incoming message, no more analyzing every interaction for hidden manipulation. We could simply be ourselves, together, building the life we wanted rather than defending against the life others tried to impose on us. Jessica's business adapted to the move, transitioning partially online while she established a new physical presence in our new city. Her resilience continued to amaze me, the way she could take setbacks and transform them into opportunities, the grace with which she navigated challenges that would have broken a lesser spirit. My own career took an unexpected turn for the better. Without the constraints of my family's expectations and connections, I found myself exploring aspects of my field I had previously overlooked, discovering talents and interests I had suppressed to fit their narrow definition of success. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had threatened that my career would suffer without their influence, but in reality, it was flourishing precisely because I had escaped it. We made new friends, people who knew us only as we were now, not as extensions of our families or products of our pasts. There was a refreshing honesty to these relationships, a simplicity in being taken at face value rather than being measured against years of preconceptions and expectations. Sometimes the past still reached for us. A random dream featuring my mother's voice, a moment of déjà vu in a restaurant that resembled one from our old city, an occasional email from a distant relative seeking to reconnect. But these were just echoes now, diminishing with time, losing their power to disrupt our new reality. My younger brother visited us several months after we settled in. The change in him was remarkable. He stood straighter, spoke more confidently, laughed more freely. Therapy was helping him untangle the complex web of manipulation that had defined our upbringing. He was building his own identity apart from the family mythology, discovering who he was when not being constantly told who he should be. "Do you ever miss them?" he asked me during his visit, as we sat on our new deck watching the sunset. The question wasn't accusatory or loaded. It was simply curious, one survivor asking another about the landscape of their healing. I considered it honestly before answering. "I miss who I wanted them to be," I finally said. "I miss the parents I thought I had before I understood what was really happening. But the actual people they are? No, I don't miss them at all." He nodded, understanding completely. That's exactly it. I'm mourning people who never actually existed. Jessica joined us then, bringing out drinks and settling beside me. Her hand found mine automatically, our fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of two people who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger for it. To freedom, my brother proposed, raising his glass. To freedom, we echoed, the simple toast encompassing so much more than the word itself could convey. That night, after my brother had gone to bed in our guest room, Jessica and I stood in our new kitchen, speaking in quiet voices about the day, about the future, about everything and nothing. I never thought it would end like this, I admitted. Growing up, I couldn't have imagined a life completely separate from them. Do you regret it? She asked, her eyes searching mine for the complete truth. Not for a second, I replied without hesitation. They gave me an impossible choice, you or them, but it was never really a choice at all. She smiled, the genuine smile that had captured my heart years ago, before Thursday meetings and GPS trackers and restraining orders had complicated our world. We're going to be okay, aren't we? I pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the solid reality of her presence against the backdrop of everything we had lost and gained. We already are, I told her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it completely. We had escaped the web of control that had ensnared generations of my family. We had chosen freedom over conditional acceptance, authentic love over manipulated loyalty. The cost had been high, higher than I could have imagined when this all began. But standing there in our new home, with the woman who had helped me find the courage to break free, I knew without a doubt that it had been worth every painful step of the journey. The Thursday meetings that had dominated my life for 29 years were now nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when control is mistaken for love, when conformity is valued over authenticity. They had shaped me, yes, but they no longer defined me. That power belonged to me now, and to Jessica, and to the life we were building together. One honest conversation, one genuine moment, one free choice at a time.